never used the word cure. It can be an effective treatment, and there's a big difference between treatment and cure. Some people use cannabis preparations to treat the symptoms of their illness, and some use it to directly treat their illness.
So it's more about management of symptoms then in that case.
It's a mixture of both, because I've met people who have consumed cannabis to directly treat their cancer as well as their symptoms, and some people have gone into remission, and with them having no other treatment, it has to be put down to the cannabis and the preparations they've taken.
Are there examples of that on the island? Are there case studies of people you've met here?
Not on the island, because it's still fairly new to the island, but over in the UK mainland and certainly throughout the world, I'm aware of many cases. The most striking in the UK is the case of a young man called Darren Blackwell, who was given 3 days to live when his mum started administering cannabis oil to him. And long story short, 5 years later, he's not dead, he's totally in remission, and he's leading a normal life.
So what's brought you to the Isle of Man? Because we've spoken to you a couple of times now. What was that sort of born from?
I came over to the Isle of Man when I first heard that the Manx government were looking at into regulating and making cannabis available, and then I heard about the consultation. I was a little bit disappointed that the questions I seemed in the consultation were quite loaded. And but despite that, there was an overwhelming result from the people of the Isle of Man that they want change and they want access to cannabis.
Loaded in what way, do you think?
Seems to be loaded in the way the questions were. There seems to be a effort and a drive in the Isle of Man administration to follow the UK. And that was a question that surprised me, was that to fully follow the UK. Now, less than 2.5% of people in the consultation voted to follow the UK. So I think that's a clear message that the Isle of Man needs to develop its own policy and not follow anyone else, certainly not the UK.
Can you appreciate the caution, though, on what is obviously a very big issue? I mean, if the island does take a big step in legislative reform, that is a big step for a small jurisdiction.
It's a very big step, but it's well within the jurisdiction. Other countries and small countries throughout the world have done it. The island of St. Vincent, for example, in the Caribbean, population of less than 100,000, they've made medicinal cannabis available. So is Jamaica, where I'm doing a lot of my research these days. So it'd be a bold step, certainly, for people in the Isle of Man. But I've been approached since last year when I first came here on this subject by a very nice young lady who's got terminal cancer, and she wanted assistance, and she wanted to consume cannabis to treat her illness. So that puts me in a very difficult situation. She's asking me to break Manx law. Now, why should this young lady be in that situation?
You've given an example of another sort of comparable jurisdiction. Why do you feel change was implemented there and perhaps is less difficult to do so here? Is that a cultural thing, perhaps?
Possibly. I think in the smaller jurisdictions or the smaller countries where the politicians are closer to their people, that it seems to be things are moving more quickly. As I said, small islands in the Caribbean. And here in Jamaica, here in the Isle of Man, it's very possible, because it's within your power to change the law, because you have your own Misuse of Drugs Act. You don't have to follow the UK Misuse of Drugs Act.
Coming back to the argument or the view that cannabis products can be used to treat the symptoms of cancer, if there are truth in these claims and if it's working for people, why has it not become more accepted in medical circles, do you think?
I think it's mainly because doctors have been taught a very simple message that illegal drugs are bad and prescription drugs are good, and that is far too simplistic. Also, doctors don't learn anything, or any clinicians learn anything about cannabis and its medicinal benefits throughout their training. For example, human bodies, we all have an endocannabinoid system. Doctors don't know about this. This is why someone like me with no medical qualifications ends up lecturing at the Royal College of GPs and universities to doctors who basically should be lecturing to me.
So you have no medical qualifications and no sort of clinical experience. Is that fair?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, why should people listen, I guess, is the question.
Well, it's a case of I research cannabinoids, cannabis plants, and its medicinal benefits. That's throughout history. Research is going on throughout the world now, and there is lab studies and evidence to indicate that THC, for example, and CBD can directly attack and kill cancer cells. That was discovered by Professor Manuel Guzman at Madrid University nearly 15 years ago. And interestingly enough, in Spain, they are conducting human trials into treating sufferers of glioblastomas, brain tumors, with cannabis, which is mainly an extract of THC and CBD post-surgery in conjunction with chemotherapy.
But if that's 15 years ago, why haven't we seen the change already?
Main problem is because every country in the world has a Misuse of Drugs Act, which is based on UN conventions, main one being UN Convention of 1961. So this is why the Manx Misuse of Drugs Act is more or less a copy of the UK one, which is the same as the Dangerous Drugs Act in Jamaica, because they're all based on the UN conventions. And it was deemed for many years that cannabis had no medicinal benefits, and that obviously is incorrect. Now, politics needs to catch up with the science, and this is what people want. They want access to this effective medicine, which has been used for thousands of years.
So whether it be in the UK or on the Isle of Man or elsewhere, what communication have you had with medical professionals then?
Here on the Isle of Man or worldwide?
Both.
Well, I've lectured throughout the world to medical professionals. I get consultations are sought privately by doctors, even neurologists. So I advise a wide range of clinicians on cannabinoids and their potential medical benefits and the treatments.
And what's the reception been like? Mixed, I presume?
Very positive. A lot of doctors feel that they should have the power to prescribe cannabis and cannabis preparations, but they all admit that they lack the knowledge and they have no confidence in doing so. Quite a few doctors have contact me privately because so many doctors these days are getting contacted by their customers, some patients who want access to cannabis medicines. And I've also had contact from GPs here on the Isle of Man as well.
Tell us a bit more about some of the conversations you've had here then. So you say GPs have been in touch?
Yes, I've had a conversation with a number of GPs on the island who all want to know more about the subject, but they don't know where to begin. They don't learn about it in their training. There's no advice being given by the governing bodies. But interestingly enough, from the consultation, over 55% of respondents said that they wanted to get cannabis and medicinal cannabis from dispensaries like they do in America and not necessarily from their GP.
So what's the current legislative framework? Because am I right in thinking that medicinal cannabis is accessible in extreme circumstances at the minute? Is that true?
In the UK, the law changed and the regulations changed 1st November last year, which I think apply here, which basically allow certain neurologists and consultants to prescribe cannabis for certain conditions. So it's very, very restrictive. But doctors over here, for example, in the Isle of Man, have been able to prescribe what's known as Sativex, which is a cannabis extract made by GW Pharmaceuticals in the UK. They've been able to prescribe that. But NICE, who advise doctors, say that it's not cost effective. So it's very, very difficult. That their hands are tied. They can only prescribe Sativex, which NICE won't endorse because they say it's not cost effective, but then they also don't have the knowledge to prescribe cannabis in its raw form, which again some people want.
So if they have the ability to provide Sativex, is that right?
Yes.
Has that happened? Have there been many instances, whether it be in the UK or here?
I'm not aware of anyone on the Isle of Man who has obtained Sativex, but in the UK there are a few hundred patients, and it's only licensed for MS in UK mainland, and there are over 80,000 MS sufferers, but less than 200 of them are actually being prescribed Sativex, but that's on a cost basis. They say it's too expensive.